The Chargers are ride or die with a coverage scheme that has killed them for 2 weeks. UCLA heads to Utah, and USC will wind up scraping the Sun Devils off the bottom of their cleats. Hi, I'm James of Faithful Angelino Sports with the September 22nd edition of Friday Night Chalk Talk, where we break down the keys and the goals for each of LA's football teams during the regular season and the playoffs. Tonight, we're going to mostly talk about the Chargers' defensive woes. Then we'll talk a little bit about how UCLA doesn't know what to expect in Utah, a little bit about USC. The reason that we are not going to be talking about the Rams tonight is because we simply don't have enough information. The Rams are not playing on Sunday. They're part of Monday Night Football. And Cincinnati, their opponent, we don't even know if Joe Burrow is going to play due to a chronic calf injury. So without that much information, do we really want to break down the unknown? Of course not. So I want to start off by talking about the Chargers, and I want to state the obvious. Back in the day, decades ago, you could predict with damn near pinpoint accuracy what the other team's offense was, or for that matter, the defense. Oklahoma, they're going to run the wishbones, 60s, 70s, 80s, back in those decades. The Chicago Bears in the 80s, they ran the 46D. Everything since, though, has come up to diversification, has come down to diversification. So I'm not trying to tell you that the Chargers coaching staff, particularly head coach Brandon Staley, always runs the cover six, but it is a tactic that he commonly uses, and the Chargers now are getting scorched with it. Now, Staley will often show cover two to the opposing offense. For those of you who don't know a lot of football terminology, cover two basically means that both safeties will play deep in order to prevent the so-called explosive play. Cover one means one safety goes deep. Cover three, three safeties. You get the idea, right? Often, however, it is a ruse when Staley shows you cover two, using it to confuse the opposing quarterbacks. And it's not working now. Staley is calling cover six, and he has done so on at least 12 pass plays this year. This is according to True Media. And opponents have benefited with 7 so-called explosive plays, including 3 pass plays that went for at least 35 yards. So what the hell happened, right? I mean, it damn sure worked like a charm when he was the defensive coordinator with the Rams. And even though the Chargers don't have Aaron Donald, they still have some pretty damn good players. So what gives? The first thing to appreciate before we go into any discussion of what the opposing team will do is to explain that this defensive formation is actually complex. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to communicate what you're doing with your teammates. Cover six does not simply mean 6 defensive backs. That would be a dime defense. The coverage unit in the cover six, they actually split the field in half. If this is the line of scrimmage, they'll split it lengthwise. One half, the strong side, the one with more receivers, they'll play at cover two. Only the people on that half of the field will play cover two. As for the other side, the weak side, they will play cover four, also known as quarters. So 4 + 2, cover 6. You get the idea. Now, why is this a problem? Because it works best with experienced defensive backs. People who know how to recognize what the opponent is doing as soon as possible, preferably before the opponent actually does this. You have to be experienced in zone concepts so that everybody is on the same page. So aside from safety Derwin James, who everybody agrees is a damn good player, who else is in the Chargers secondary? Well, Jasir Taylor, the star, which we'll get to in a moment. Second year. He's been promoted in his second year to the most important position on the defense, the star. It's a hybrid linebacker safety type of position. So in other words, you may have the number of a defensive back, but you might be playing in run support on the line. You're a second-year player, and you're supposed to know everything about what the opponent's going to do. That's what made Jalen Ramsey so effective when he was the star with the Rams. He was that intelligent. But aside from Taylor, who else? Well, JT Woods, safety, second year. Asante Samuel, who, by the way, used to be the star. He was now just removed from the star position, asked to play traditional safety. Third year. Alohi Gilman's in his fourth year. So, okay, maybe he's got the experience. But now you might be saying, well, James, what about J.C. Jackson? Wasn't he a star with the Patriots? And that's fair. But the Patriots play more man defense than they do zone. Way more man than a lot of other teams in the NFL. And he had knee surgery at that. So I would argue that this defensive backfield is not necessarily ready to run cover 6. And miscommunications lead to big problems. So let's take a moment and talk about what each of the two opponents that the Chargers have faced, Miami and Tennessee, what they did to recognize cover 6 and exploit it. First, the Dolphins in the season opener. Well, the Dolphins have arguably the fastest receivers in the game. Please note who is in the lower corner of this screen with the arrow. In this instance, if this is the Miami Dolphins, that would be Tyreek Hill, the cheetah. Oh boy, you had him sprinting in motion, not just jogging in motion, but taking off as fast as he can in motion prior to the snap. Now this presents the Chargers with two defensive problems. One, the Bolts stopped Miami last year by chucking Hill and the other Dolphins receivers at the line of scrimmage because they weren't going in motion. You've just given the fastest player in the NFL a running head start. Good luck trying to catch up with him and chuck him at the line. Secondly, if Tyreek Hill is sprinting to the other side of the line of scrimmage, which exactly is the strong side now? Do you know? Do you? And by the way, if that receiver is a speedster as well, now you're talking about overloading one half with two of the fastest wide receivers in the game. Who covers the cheetah? Khalil Mack? Really? When John Gruden returned to the Raiders a few years ago, Paul Guenther was the defensive coordinator. That dude also loved cover 6. The Raiders also were super young in the secondary, and opponent after opponent exposed ridiculous gaps in that defense. When the Raiders eventually moved on to Gus Bradley, a former Chargers defensive coordinator, they simplified the play calls with a cover 3, by the way. So there is a second flaw that Tennessee exploited when they defeated the Chargers last week. For example, early in the game, Tennessee just blasted the Chargers right in the teeth with a 70-yard completion. Now, I didn't expect Tennessee to pass well, because they have Derrick Henry in the backfield. This is the so-called intelligent smash mouth idea that Tennessee likes to run. Just basically punch you in the mouth with a running back until you submit. But that particular play, the 70-yard bomb, ignited the Titans' offense. So what did they do? Well, they came out. I have one tight end in this drawing, but actually they had two. Okay? They had DeAndre Hopkins on this side of the field. And on the other hand, they had Treylon Burks. So, what wound up happening? Well, for openers, Hopkins ran a deep crossing route. Burks, on the other hand, just went for it and went deep. So what happens when you look at the way that this defense is slotted? Okay? Well, for one, because they were trying to respect Derrick Henry, they brought at least two more people up to the line of scrimmage. So that's one. Number two, it is true that the Titans receivers for the most part are awful, but Hopkins does have a career rep, which he built with both Houston and Arizona. He is the only true threat, or so we thought, that Tennessee had. So you would figure that the Chargers defenders, if they're going to keep an eye on any receiver in Tennessee, it would be him. And in this version of the cover 6, they did. Why? Because you had this guy, this corner, covering DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, these guys were playing run support, but you had coverage here, the safety with deep responsibility. And over here, notice what this safety is doing. He is always in the cover 6, keeping his eyes to the strong side for additional help. Oh boy, so what are you looking at? You're looking at all of these people keeping their eye on DeAndre Hopkins. And what does that do? You guessed it. All of these people focusing on Derrick Henry, all of these people focusing on DeAndre Hopkins, you have now exploited the Chargers cornerback. And Ryan Tannehill, by the way, did play a role in this as well, not just throwing the ball. When he went back to pass, he did 2 things. One was a play action. So that kept the linebackers honest by thinking that it was going to be a run. And then his eyes, if you look at the replay, his eyes were focused over here, as if he was going to throw to DeAndre Hopkins all along. Then he turned, and again, single coverage on the cornerback. Mercy me. Now, if this were, notice what would have happened though, because there is a little bit of luck involved. Assume for the moment that what the Titans did was, because they didn't necessarily know, they came out with 2 tight ends. Let's assume that they guessed wrong, that they had the wrong route called. Assume for the moment DeAndre Hopkins ran deep and Burks ran the deep cross. Well, now you've got the perfect coverage. You've got all kinds of people looking at DeAndre Hopkins. You have people now also covering Burks if he decides to go over the middle. You have it taken care of. Didn't happen on Sunday. And by the way, one other thing, we've been talking about the cover 6. If this were a classic cover 2 instead of a cover 6, the safety who got burned by not supporting his cornerback, if you look at the replay, this safety is Derwin James. If this were a classic cover 2, Derwin James is not looking over to see what DeAndre Hopkins is doing. He would have been looking straight ahead. He would have noticed that Burks was running deep, and he would have helped. And there would have been double coverage, which means more likely the pass would have gone incomplete. So what does this have to do now for the Chargers, now that they're in Minnesota, that they didn't have before? Well, the primary thing that might work in their favor is that against Miami and Tennessee, they had to respect the run. Minnesota can't run. They traded this week, the Vikings did, for Cam Akers because they have had all types of problems running the football. So at least the Bolts can say, you know what, we're damn confident that those guys over there want to throw, which is fine. Simplifies the defensive mindset. And I might also add the Vikings offensive line is pretty damn thin. Left tackle Ole Odoa out for the year. The center who calls the blocking schemes missed last week's game. So if that's the case, in all honesty, you know they're going to pass. It would not surprise me to see the Bolts thinking blitz all day to try to beat the living daylights out of Kirk Cousins. But it's risky because Justin Jefferson is a stud. He had more than 150 yards receiving in each of his 2 games this year with the Vikings. And oh, by the way, Jordan Addison, remember him? A touchdown in each of his first 2 games. And I also would be remiss if I did not mention that when a team plays back-to-back road games, that team scuffles during the second game. Not to mention that both of these Chargers road games are in the East Coast time zone, which means the Chargers are barely getting out of bed. So the schedule makers did the Bolts no favors. I make no predictions for that game, but at least I want to give you an idea of what to expect. Let's turn to UCLA. How much do you believe in Dante Moore? I mean, really believe in Dante Moore. The reason I ask is because the Bruins are about to play on the road against one of the nation's most overlooked programs. Utah has won the Pac-12 in consecutive years. They return one of the conference's best defenses, one of the best offensive lines. Even worse, for all the talk over who is going to start a quarterback for UCLA, who starts for the Utes is going to be a game-time decision. Now, for the record, I think the decision's already been made. I think it's going to be Cameron Rising. Last update I saw on the guy who tore his anterior cruciate ligament in the Rose Bowl, He was a full participant in practice this week. Coach Kyle Whittingham said Rising looked great in practice. I don't see any reason why he's not starting. There are a lot of things working against both Moore and the 22nd ranked Bruins, though. For example, without Rising, the Utes still opened the season by beating Florida silly. Only the Gators have since fought back and got back into the top 25. Opposing coaches believe that the Utes are the physically toughest team in the conference. They play in one of the nation's highest stadiums in terms of altitude, elevation above sea level. So that could put a damper on the up-tempo offense that UCLA Chip Kelly wants to run. And by the way, last year's Utes defense, number 2 in the conference against the run. Junior Tafuna, Samote Pepa, and Van Fillinger anchor a defensive line supported by linebacker Lander Barton. And Zamaya Vaughn might be the best cover corner in the Pac-12. Might be. So I go back to my original question. How much do you trust Dante Moore at this point in his career? A freshman. UCLA upset the Utes last year, but that was at the Rose Bowl with a senior quarterback and a senior running back. And Utah still scored 32 points. Utah appears to have one of 2 possible flaws. Possible ones. One is Rising. Is he truly healthy? Is he truly ready? But Rising, while not considered an elite NFL prospect, knows that offense inside and out. He's been at Utah for 6 years. Now, the second flaw that could be exploited, defensive back. I mentioned how the one guy might be the best coverage corner in the Pac-12. But I think for the Bruins to win, J. Michael Sturdivant and Kyle Ford have to just break out. Go nuts. I think the offensive line plus Moore's athleticism can hold up just long enough to get Sturdivant or Ford open, but the Bruins wide receivers have to help this freshman out a lot because, again, Utah is physical, experienced, and probably has a chip on their shoulder after losing in Pasadena last year. Frankly, I think Utah wins. The Utes might even want to make a statement by trying to embarrass UCLA. But those are my 2 cents. There is a path for UCLA to post the upset. I just don't want to put money on it, frankly. Does the name Drew Pine ring a bell? If you're a Trojans fan, I saw him play quarterback last year for Notre Dame. He wasn't that bad, but the Irish actually had recruits. They actually were ranked. He left the Irish because Notre Dame can recruit. They found a quarterback they liked. Now, the Sun Devils simply don't have the recruiting resources that Notre Dame does. And for Pete's sakes, the entire program was in shambles over a recruiting scandal. Bunch of players left, the entire coaching staff gone. New coach Kenny Dillingham cycled in 30 players from the transfer portal. So what is the result? ASU is 1-2. Last week they lost. But not only did they lose, they got shut out at home to Fresno State. Now, if you can sit there and try and tell me, as long as you're outside of the walls of an insane asylum and you think you could give me a reason why USC can't just beat the living daylights out of this team, I'm all ears. I challenge you to come up with a way. Because even if Caleb Williams doesn't play, I believe the Trojans win this game handily. And of course Caleb Williams is going to play. So, them's my 2 cents. It's not even worth thinking about. Just crack open a beer on Saturday evening and enjoy yourself while you watch the beatdown. So, to conclude, USC, that's about as guaranteed a win as you're going to see. I think UCLA has a path to victory, but I wouldn't put money on it. I believe Utah is going to win. And as for the Chargers and the Vikings, 2 0-2 teams, both with profound problems that they haven't been able to address. You tell me. Now, if you enjoyed talking football with me tonight, don't forget to subscribe to Faithful Angelinos. We're talking football every single Friday night during the regular season and the playoffs for the LA teams. Thanks for watching. I'm James. We'll be back tomorrow. Faithful Angelinos is a Kian Corte El Queso production. Take care.